Welcome to episode 24 of the Tiger 700 project. Here's my diagram of all the layers that go into the body structure, and you see the arrow is still on number 3. We are still in the foam stage. I spent quite a bit of time here working on the vehicle itself in the foam stage, but one of the reasons I'm spending a lot of time and giving a lot of detail here on stage 3 is before I started this project, I went out and I did all the research I could find on how to build a foam buck for a car. And I found small projects, I found some motorcycle accessories, and I found some huge projects on how they did it, but none that really fit what we're trying to do here, and that's a car body. So I learned an awful lot during this foam stage and came up with some techniques that I think will be helpful to other builders. So here we go. I feel like I spent the first few days of the foam carving just figuring out what tools to use. I hadn't carved the foam before, but watched a lot of YouTube videos, seeing how other people do it, but nothing was really working for me. So I thought I might just review the tools I've tried. So once you got the panels cut, you got them glued up, you start carving, that was a whole new bag of worms. So I needed something to take a lot of material off in a hurry because they're going from square slabs to rounded. So I started using rasps. I've seen these used in YouTube videos, and indeed, they do work. They do work. They take off a lot of material and very quickly. The problem with these, though, is that they tend to grab and damage the foam underneath. So I'll show you, like for example, I recently sanded this, and it's somewhat smooth, at least from what you can probably see in the camera. And you look up here, and you see all these little, it looks like acne. But what happens is as you're using a rasp, even lightly, it takes off the material pretty quickly, but it tends to grab the material to get, and sort of bunch it up together in these places. So it does cause damage. I'm going to go back and repair all these. So I stopped using the rasps. So what's next in our lineup here? Here's another thing I tried. This is actually a drywall sand block. And it's made not for sandpaper, but for sand screens. So it's a see-through screen, I don't know if you can see that. And it does have a connection to the vacuum cleaner. So this is a way I thought I could, remove a bunch of material, have it come out fairly smooth, and get rid of all the dust. Well, the screen does have lots of holes in it, but it's not big enough for the foam chunks to pass through, so it really not much went into the vacuum cleaner. And this one actually kind of bunched up the foam as well and caused those little acne spots. Not quite as badly, but it didn't work. The next thing on the agenda was this. I made myself a little sanding block, took a piece of sandpaper and just basically glued it on there. And this actually works pretty good. And I'll probably use it some more, but I used a really rough sandpaper. It's a 40 grit, which is really, really rough. And it's almost a little too rough for the job. So I may still end up using this, but I can put a different piece of sandpaper on the back, something that's not quite so gritty. So all these things were hand tools that I was using, and it was wearing me out. I've got to get some sort of power tools involved in this, or I just won't be able to finish it. It's just going to wear me out. So one of the first things I tried was an angle grinder. And I've got an angle grinder with a flat disc pad on it, and this is really aggressive. Now this will take off material, I mean like a hot knife through butter. You've got to be really careful with it. I mean, normally when you use a tool that's grinding or sanding, you put it on the material and the material kind of pushes back at you, right, while you're using it. Not this. It just goes vroom, and it'll dive through 2 inches of foam like that. So it's very difficult to make any sort of I'm not really looking for even precise cuts, but cuts that you won't have to repair later. I mean, it is like you don't get any resistance from the foam at all. You almost kind of taking and sort of gliding it through air. That's how little resistance it was. It was just too much. As I started the carving phase, I made a pretty big mess. There's a half inch of foam all around this car. And I've already cleaned it up once. This is just what's over the last day or two. So I was looking for something to use to help cut down on the dust. And that was one of the other problems with this is when you're using this, it flings dust everywhere. I mean, not just within the 3 feet of the car. I mean, all over the garage. I've got pink dust on everything. So I've stopped using that. One of the things I thought I would try is this right here. This is something I built myself. And the idea is that you connect the vacuum cleaner to the end of this and you clamp it here and it creates like a windshield. So when all the foam starts falling off, it would create this sort of curtain and pull all the filings into there. It really sounded like a great idea, but it didn't work. I turned it on and basically almost none of the dust went in there. It just wasn't strong enough to make it happen. So scrap that. I feel like I finally found the right tool combination to help me carve my body. This is an orbital sander, just a plain electric orbital sander. It does have a vacuum hookup. I've got that hooked up to my vacuum cleaner, and by simply changing out the grit of sandpaper, going from a rough to a fine, it's going to give me the controllability that I need, and it also really helps keep down the dust. So to start out with roughing out the body, I got the most aggressive grit sandpaper that I could find. It happens to be a 40 grit paper. That is pretty rough stuff. But it seems like it is the right grit to start with. It cuts through it pretty quickly, but not so much that you're out of control. So it seems to work pretty well. Let's give it a try. There you go. That I put this panel on because I need a little more depth here, as I said in one of the last videos. And I just showed you how to taper it in. That is completely tapered in as much as I want to do it for heavy sculpting. You can see it only took a couple of minutes. And we've got a very consistent line across here. And it really didn't drop very much dust at all. One of the things you might notice is I put a center line down this piece that I applied, and that's a little guide for me. So as I taper up from the bottom and I taper down from the top, I want to come in and use that as my guide, so I come in about the same amount from up top. I do the same thing on the other side, and I keep my two sides with an even profile. I've been using my orbital sander for about 4 days now with the vacuum cleaner attached, and you can see it is really picking up a lot of that dust from the sanding. I have completely filled this, gosh, what, a 5 or 6 gallon vacuum cleaner. So it's definitely working. It's keeping it out of the air and off the floor. So the next step before I really get into the refinement process is to ensure it's
symmetrical on both sides, that you don't have a lopsided car, and you want to do that before you start working on the details, because otherwise you're putting details on a lopsided car. So that's what this is all about, this apparatus. I pulled this homemade tool away from the car so you can get a better look at it. This is what I call a replicator. It's not like the replicator on Star Trek, you know, the one that you just talk into the replicator and you say,
Tea Earl Grey, hot.
It's not that kind of replicator. This is one that replicates the shape or the contour of each side of the car. Tells me what the contour is on each side, so I can then take it around to the other side and see if it matches. So let's take a little closer look. First off, the wooden portion was all built from just scrap wood that I had laying around the garage. You can see it's just 3/4 inch plywood pulled together with bolts, and there are leveling screws on the bottom. And that is, so once I had this thing put together, I could tune it to be exactly perpendicular in both X and Y directions, both to side and forward and back. Then attached to that, you'll see these blue contour gauges. These are typically used in woodworking, like when you're trying to replicate the contour of some casing, let's say around a doorway. But they work really great here. They generally come in 5-inch and 10-inch lengths. I ended up with 3 10-inch contour gauges, and those are attached via a second piece of wood onto this mast. And as you get a closer look here, you can see that it has all these individual pieces that you can move. Like right here, you can see I can move them. And then what you do is you place those against the car. And you might wonder why there's a spring on the bottom. Well, this whole thing tends to be really heavy on one end, and I just needed a counterweight. I had that spring laying around the garage, so it works perfect. It clamps right on there and gives me all the counterweight I need. So let me show you how the replicator works. You can see I've got this laid up against the body, and I've got it on a specific line on the grid. As you remember, on my build table, I've got it all laid out in 50mm grid lines. So I know where it is this way, and I know where it is this way exactly. And I lay it up against here, and then what I do is I use these gauges to help find the contour. So basically, you've got it in place. You just basically tap these little items, these little tongs in place until you have it. You've got it all kind of measured out here, and it does a good job. As you can see, it even finds the places where my body really isn't smooth yet, since it's just roughed in. You can see it's a little rough there. Then up here, same thing, just sort of tap them in one by one without moving the gauge. You can see it can only go out so far. Just tapping those in, and that's about as far as the gauge reaches right there. Okay, so I think you can see I've got those up against the body now. So now what I do is I take this and I put it on the other side, and hopefully it matches. So here we are on the other side, and I've placed in exactly the same position, the replicator, this way and this way. And I've got my car and body centered on the table as well. Everything's been measured out as close as I can possibly get it. So let's see how we did. I didn't do so well. You can see right here, I don't know if you can see this on the camera, the amount of distance that there is right here. I'll put this down in here. I've got almost an inch at the top here. If you look right in this area, I'm off quite a bit. As I get down lower, I'm actually very, very close. Very close. But you can see I've got some work to do here. And since this side is actually not as wide as the other side, my first inclination is just sand down the other side. But as you're doing that, you want to make sure you're maintaining the shape you want. So then you sort of look at one side or the other and just look at it and say, well, which shape do you really need? Is it worth building out a side, or just sand it? It's much easier to sand it if you can make that work. I've now used my replicator around the entire vehicle, looking at the contours and comparing them side to side in a vertical stance. In other words, the contour going from top to bottom. But there's some areas in the car where really you need to go horizontal. So I have modified my replicator, as you can see right over here. It now has a horizontal table on it. This horizontal table slides up and down so I can, do contours at any height on the car. And what it has is a very precisely level table here. You then attach the same contour arms that I was using it vertically, and allows me to do a contour on one side, then flip it over and check it against the other side. So here we go with the horizontal replicator guide. It's a little more complicated to use than vertical, but still not too bad and well worth the time. So the first thing you want to do is to line up the entire gauge on the center line, which I have already done, marks, and I know it's exactly on the center line. I know the car is centered on the table as well. Then you place your contour arm here, and you set it up so it is directly parallel. And I have got little lines set up here, little gauge lines, to help me line it up exactly. Then once you've got that, then you take the contour of the car by simply pressing in all these fingers. Hope you can see that on the camera. Going all the way around until you've got a good contour. Okay? So now you know what that side is, and you want to replicate it on the other side. I'm just going to pull some of these back. Okay, just do a little tweaking on that just to make sure it's right. Okay, so that's our contour. Now the trick is to take this off and put it on the other side carefully so you don't move any of the fingers or any of the adjustments. So here we go. Okay, so there's the guide, right? Take it, flip it over. And I have made these markings the same on both sides. So you just take it from this side over to this one. Lay it in place. And screw it down. A little bit of fumble fingers here getting the nut on there. There it goes. And again, make sure it's straight on this side. Okay, there we go. Then take a look down through the middle here, and you can see the gap. And that's how you tell whether one side is symmetrical with the other. And then on this one, I do have a little gap. So I've got to do a little work on that side to bring it in with this side. In addition to the replicator, I find that a laser level with crosshairs versus just points does help you line up the car and ensure things are symmetrical on each side. So I've got a laser leveler set here just on a ladder. It automatically levels. You just need to put it to the height you want it. And you can see here it's running right down my center line. You can see through the dust, the pink dust, and right up through the middle. So that allows me to then check side to side
whether it's symmetrical or not. The level line also helped me make sure that my two headlights are perfectly parallel with each other, and they are within a very small, within about 1 millimeter, so I'm good there. But this is really helpful in addition to the replicator.